Our panelists will offer practical strategies and tools to address and combat anti-Semitism within Catholic circles. Our panelists are Maggie Phillips from Tablet Magazine, Kathryn Jean Lopez from the National Review Institute, Phil Dolitsky from the Philos Project, James O'Reilly from the Philos Project. Maggie Phillips has authored the series Religious Literacy in America for Tablet Magazine, work made possible by a grant from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations. A graduate of the College of the Holy Cross, her writing has appeared in America Magazine, Real Clear Investigations, Military Review, Military Spouse Magazine, Word on Fire, and ARC Magazine. She is a proud Army daughter, wife, and sister, and an even prouder mother of 3. Kathryn Jean Lopez is a senior fellow at the National Review Institute, where she directs the Center for Religion, Culture, and Civil Society. She is also religion editor of National Review Magazine, where she has been on the editorial staff, including as editor of the National Review Online for over a quarter of a century. She is published widely in Catholic and secular publications and is also a nationally syndicated columnist with Andrews McMeel Universal. Lopez is author of A Year with the Mystics, Visionary Wisdom for Daily Living. She speaks frequently on faith in public life, virtue, and prayer. James O'Reilly is the Associate Director of Philos Catholic. He graduated from Christendom College with a BA in philosophy, focusing on the relationship between language, morality, and truth. In 2022, he founded The Broken Binnacle, a platform of writers seeking to revitalize American Catholic culture through writing, art, and the humanities, and to promote and share the Catholic faith. He is a proud native of the Shenandoah Valley. Philip Dolitsky is a strategic advisor at the Philos Project. He earned his bachelor's degree in history from Yeshiva University and his master's in international relations from American University. Prior to joining Philos, Philip worked at a national law firm doing research and analysis for several high-profile counterterrorism cases. In addition to his work at the Philos Project, Philip has published extensively on military strategy, military ethics, and national security, with his writings appearing in Chesterfield Strategy, Parameters, Military Strategy Magazine, and more. Welcome, panelists. And hopefully I won't mess up the Q&A on this one. Okay. So this panel is dedicated to practical strategies and tools to combat anti-Semitism within Catholic circles. One of the most gratifying parts of being in this space and doing this work is meeting Catholics, particularly those who come from Jewish families, who are more sensitive to the uptick within Catholic circles and who feel passionate about the Coalition of Catholics Against Anti-Semitism, which was launched at Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio in October 2023. Maggie, I'd like to begin with you. In your article for Word on Fire entitled, Christians Have an Obligation and a Way to Stop Anti-Semitism, what is the nature of this obligation, and what is the path that you propose?
Sure. First, thank you, Simone. Thank you to Philos, Catholic Information Center, and to all of the panelists for your wisdom and insight. I don't have the PhDs and master's degrees and impressive resumes of everybody here, but I have a BA in poli-sci from the College of the Holy Cross. I have been at Tablet since 2020, and I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So I think hopefully I have enough, behind me to kind of opine on some of this. So yeah, I think, I would like to start with church leadership. Church leadership needs to be proactive in encouraging their priests to educate their congregations at a local level about all of the amazing things we talked about here today. I joked to someone earlier that I kind of feel like Buddy the Elf in Elf when he says he's just excited to meet another human who shares his affinity for elf culture. We're all here because I hear the word niche being used a lot. This shouldn't be niche. It should be something that we're happy to share. There's so much good insight and wisdom here and truth, right, that needs to be shared. And then being present can be things that I've done myself. with folks from my parish and my kids' Catholic school, reaching out to our local Jewish community, going to a Shabbat dinner, coming to a service. And we learned so much, showing up in a spirit of humility and just being there. And I would say at a very basic level, there's some things you can do as lay Catholics without a degree, without a vast international relations experience. Be vigilant about the content that you and your kids are consuming online, what podcasts they're listening to. Have open conversations about those things. Ask questions. Make acts of reparation to the Sacred Heart for things that are happening that you see that you know aren't right. I love Jews so much that I pray to a Jewish guy every day. If you're Catholic, you believe that there is a Jewish heart in heaven, a real Jewish heart that beats with love for humanity and that is profaned every day. And so, take the first Friday starting this Lent to go and make acts of reparation to the Sacred Heart after Mass. And then we have to stop doing Catholicism versus anyone. That's not why you become Catholic. You don't become Catholic to own the libs. You don't become Catholic to own the cons, right? You become Catholic because you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So those are like some very basic things. But I'd like to circle back to my earlier point about church leadership. I guess when we talk about how we can lead Catholics away from falling over that precipice into anti-Semitism, my question would be, what Catholics? I think we've all seen the recently released Pew survey that showed that only 19% of Americans self-ID as Catholic, and of those, less than 1/3 attend Mass weekly. So you can have all the homilies about Nostra Aetate in the world, but there have to be ears to hear. And there's a precedent I would propose for the times we live in, with new disruptive technology, everyone's Pontius Pilate asking what is truth, suspicion and hostility towards elites. We've been through this before in the early modern period, right? We had the Reformation. And what did the church do in a spirit of humility? It launched the Counter-Reformation. I think we misunderstand our times when we say we're receding to like neo-pagan times. I think really what we're living through, there's precedent more in the Reformation and the spirit of the Counter-Reformation. And that means taking seriously those factors that have led to the situation we're in today, in which 800 Catholics leave the faith for every 100 who come into the church. That's the worst leave-join ratio of any faith group in the Pew survey that produced that statistic. We love to talk about St. Teresa of Avila. I do too. She's one of my patrons, and we think of her as a mystic. And we focus less on the reality that she was also highly pragmatic, and her day job was really a lot of it focused on administrative and fiscal reform. So I heard a lot in the last panel about approaching our past in humility, about the things that maybe we've done that led us to call for religious liberty. I think we also are called to a spirit of penance for the fact that there are a lot of dioceses in New York that are bankrupt because they're paying out victims of child sex abuse. I think there are places that have difficulty, if you read the Pillar, with financial issues, things like that, addressing it in a spirit of humility, again, with the spirit of the Counter-Reformation, because we need to be able to speak as people who have authority. I have a colleague at Tablet, Liel Leibovitz, who was on the America Magazine podcast, Jesuitical. And Liel, if I'm remembering correctly, described himself as a Catholic fanboy. And he said that the Catholic Church is, in his opinion, the last remaining bulwark for human dignity and freedom in the world. It's our last line of defense, and we have no other. This is coming from an observant Jewish man, and that should humble all of us deeply. So if, he called us all to believe that act like we believe in Jesus. He challenged the hosts of that podcast to give up moderation for Lent. And he said, if you really believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Messiah, live like it. Live like there is a resurrected Jesus Christ in heaven that you have a personal relationship with. And what would the world look like if Catholics really lived like that? That, to me, got me so stoked. And there's a gettable middle. National Review, the most recent issue, I think, had a book review of a book called The Moderate Majority, Real GOP Voters, and the Myth of Mass Republican Radicalization by George Hawley. And it showed that most on the American right, you hear, if you're online a lot, you hear a lot about the new right and the new right and the new right. And Candace Owens is on Theo Vaughn and Stephen Smith. And that's all true. But the vast majority from the data that George Hawley found in his study is that most people find racism and anti-Semitism abhorrent. So our main task is just letting that moderate majority know that they need to speak up and confirm that they are the majority. There is a gettable middle out there, and I can go more in depth on that, but I think we should all take courage and heart from that and speak out as Catholics. And, Christ is king, but Jesus is real, and we need to live like it.
Amazing. Before I follow up with a question for you, just because you said spiritual reparation, Sacred Heart, I'm going to read something that Jacques Maritain, quoting Leon Bloy, wrote in again that chapter on the mystery of Israel, and you can take this to your prayer time. Suppose that people around you should continually speak of your father and mother with the greatest scorn and treat them only to insults or outrageous sarcasm. How would you feel? Well, that is exactly what happens to our Lord Jesus Christ. We forget, or rather we do not wish to know, that our God-made man is a Jew, in nature of the Jews of Jews, the line of Judah, that his mother is a Jewess, the flower of the Jewish race, that the apostles were Jews, as well as all the prophets, and finally, that our holy liturgy is altogether drawn from Jewish books. How then can we express the enormity of the outrage and the blasphemy which lie in vilifying the Jewish race? Anti-Semitism is the most horrible slap in the face suffered in the ever-continuing passion of our Lord. It is the most stinging and the most unpardonable because he suffers it on his mother's face at the hands of Christians. So my follow-up question to you. In 1985, the Vatican issued notes on the correct way to present Jews and Judaism in preaching and catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church, stating, and I quote, "Because of the unique relations that exist between Christianity and Judaism, linking together at the very level of their identity, relations founded on the design of God of the covenant, the Jews and Judaism should not occupy an occasional and marginal place in catechesis. Their presence there is essential and should be organically integrated," end quote. How does this Vatican statement inform the responsibility of clergy in ensuring that Judaism is organically integrated into Christian catechesis and preaching?
Sure, yeah. This is what we call in the Army community a command emphasis issue. Priests need to get out in front, give their parishioners a time and a place to show up and accompany their Jewish brothers and sisters and learn from them, to get to know both their priest and their Jewish neighbors. It requires the priest's wholehearted endorsement and presence. And if a parishioner brings the priest the idea, then that requires an enthusiastic response and a "how can I help" from the priest. Another thing that a priest can do is, the Catholic Church leadership more generally, and I talked about this in my Word on Fire article, is reclaiming the phrase social justice from politics and bringing it back where it originated, which is Catholic social teaching, and provide service opportunities that focus parishioners on their circle of influence rather than their circle of concern, which builds community and social trust. A lot of what people were saying about, these incels in their mom's basements, a lot of where that happens is they're more focused on their circle of concern, which can be as big as your whole world, and not their circle of influence, which is the people where you live. My grandfather passed away last year, and he had a circle of concern. I remember he had a pocket issue of the Constitution that he would take out and flip through when he was bored, but he was really focused on his circle of concern. He was very active in local politics. He was very active on his school board, on his village council, and his kids saw that, and his grandkids saw that, and they became law-abiding, productive citizens, right? And so I think that there's a lot priests can do to integrate Judaism and the Jewish origins of our faith, but also that's reminding Catholics that, hey, one thing that's in your circle of concern is there is probably a Jewish community in our town that has to have a cop car outside and the doors locked when they get together. And I think that's kind of instructive, because to go back to circle of influence and circle and concern, we're all very worried about things like anti-Catholicism. I've written about it myself, the rise in attacks on Catholic churches. The fact of the matter is, 20 minutes from my local Jewish congregation that gets together with a cop car on Friday nights, I can just waltz into my church anytime I want on Wednesday for adoration, and no one's going to bug me. I don't have to worry if I'm safe. I don't feel like I have to worry that I'm safe. So these are things that priests can do to make their Catholic community more aware of the fact that they have a responsibility to our Jewish brothers and sisters. I mean, the crucifix, what clearer sign do you need than the crucifix? Jesus was Jewish enough for the Romans who he said that he's the king of the Jews on the crucifix. Is that not good enough for us? He is a Jewish man who was born of a Jewish woman. God chose the people of Israel. That's very special, and we should want to know more about it. And I go back to, this is a command emphasis issue.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to you, Kathryn. You were a speaker at the conference at Franciscan University in October 2023. What was it like for you speaking at a conference on anti-Semitism, which was planned well before the Hamas attack? That was planned before the Hamas attack, and now that there's an uptick, that occurred after, so we were preparing for it before that happened. We had to kind of readjust, and now. So what was that like?
Well, a couple of things. I remember, first of all, that conference was providential because, as you say, it was planned in advance. And then all of a sudden, this horrific attack happens. And we have Jewish leaders and Catholic leaders meeting in Steubenville, Ohio. No offense if you're from there or went to Franciscan University. But it's hard to get to people to go to Steubenville, Ohio. They don't have an airport. You got to go to Pittsburgh. It's a little bit of a pain. And yet here we were. And what struck me at that time was, I remember, I'm like the worst reporter in the world because I hate going up to people, especially if you're like Speaker of the House and you're having a terrible day already. Everybody wants to talk to you. I don't want to go up to you. So when I'm on Amtrak and I see a man with a yarmulke and I'm thinking, do I say something to him or not? I asked some Jewish friends. They said, say something. Yeah. Just like, I'm so sorry. I remember just going up to people and saying, I'm so sorry, if they were obviously Jewish. And the gratitude, and that I remember that at the conference, the rabbis in particular, who were just so grateful. As they were telling stories, I remember there was one rabbi who was speaking there who leads a synagogue in New Jersey, and he was talking about, and I have Hasidic friends who were telling me the same thing, women. They were getting their gun licenses because they were so scared. And I'm talking about people who would have never gotten gun licenses in other circumstances. I was looking back at what I had prepared for that conference, and I was telling stories about walking through New York, and I guess when the attacks happened, I had forgotten I had COVID, a really bad cold version of COVID. And so I go out for a walk one day, and we had it kind of reminded me of 9/11 a little bit, because in New York City we had the missing posters. And so we had the missing posters after the attacks on Israel. And, I was a little out of it, and some man starts cursing. And, he was mad that there was a picture of a child who was missing, probably dead. He was mad because he was Jewish, the hatred. And I remember at the time, too, one night I went out, I saw there were twins who did turn out to be killed by Hamas after they were taken. And And the first day, just these precious, adorable twins. The next day, there were Hitler mustaches written on them. I mean, like, we do that? We do that? You know, get out a marker and... I have a mini obsession, and I talked about this at the Franciscan conference with the Auschwitz Memorial Twitter feed, or X feed, whatever we call it now. If you were born today, if you were murdered today, you know, this day in history, they'll show a picture of you and a little bio. There's so many children, so many children. Sometimes they have mothers and children. Usually you don't get father because the fathers were separated. And you see the faces, and I really do try to like stop and see the faces. And I was struck by something that Jonathan Silver said earlier, where he talked about how he worries about the anti-Semite, what anti-Semitism does to that human soul, right? Who gets out a marker, which is a benign, relatively speaking, version of anti-Semitism when you compare it to what they did to the Beavis children, for instance. And I assume, because you're here, that you know who the Beavis children are. But one thing I've been struck by is I posted a picture of these precious children and on Facebook. And I don't remember, I should go back so I remember. But I think I posted a praying hands emoji or something like that. It was as their bodies were about to be released, and it was in the news. And I had been getting up at weird hours watching the inhumane, disgusting ceremonies that they had when the Red Cross would take the bodies and bring them to Israel. And so and then when they didn't even give the mom back, it was a random Gazan woman whose name I don't think we know. But so I post the picture on Facebook, and somebody congratulated me for adopting these two little boys. Other people just said, I don't know what's going on, but I'll pray for you, because I often post prayer intentions. I say this sometimes I was telling a story to some Jewish friends, and they said, again, the gratitude and the patience Jews have with Christians who are supposed to be Christian, as Maggie said. And obviously, if you don't know, you don't know, right? And people are busy, and that's what my Jewish friends say, you know, about the Christians who aren't paying attention. But my point, and I think part of the reason we're having this conference, and I thank Philos and the Catholic Information Center for doing this, Franciscan before, is because we have to know, because it's happening in our time. And I would, going back to Jonathan's point about what anti-Semitism does to the anti-Semite, what it does to the polity, what it does to the culture. If we, as Christians, dehumanize our Jewish elder brothers, fathers, as you were saying, we'll dehumanize anybody. You know, that's our spiritual family. We'd be nothing, as Maggie was saying. I got a bunch of medals here. There are a lot of Jews on my medals here. You know, we got Mary and Jesus. And, who knows what apostles I have down there. But this is real. This is part of our identity. And we can't look away. And that Franciscan conference was, and the statement that Mary Eberstadt and Andrew Dorn from Philos were key in putting together the coalition of Christians, Catholics against anti-Semitism, was, you know, I often, you were mentioning, Maggie, approaching priests for things. Sometimes when something happens, like Eli Sharabi, if you haven't seen him, looks like a skeleton. He was released recently from Hamas to find out that his wife and his two teenage daughters are dead. And when I see things like that, I want us to be marching in the streets. I always wanted, why aren't we? I remember during the HHS fight, the mandate during the Obama administration, one of my colleagues saying, why aren't you marching on Washington? It's a good question. But so last night, I joined some Franciscan University students, and I know at least one person in the room was there too, for a holy hour, a simple holy hour. And we asked, because Franciscan has a little DC, some rooms and things now that's near Immaculate Conception by the Convention Center. So we asked Father Gallagher there, and he was happy to have people pray. And I remember, and I bring this controversially, I always bring this topic up in this context because I think it goes to Jonathan's point about the culture and the polity. I don't think we'd be as indifferent as sometimes we are to the pain of abortion if we weren't as indifferent as we are to anti-Semitism. I think it's all related. And I remember when Live Action had done these undercover videos, and they were selling the remains of aborted babies, and it was happening in New York. And I'm the chair of Cardinal Dolan's Pro-Life Commission, and I said to everybody, I said, we have to do something. This is the flagship. Planned Parenthood is in our diocese. And yeah, I don't know how to organize a march, but I asked Father Jerry Murray, could you make your church available for a holy hour, praying for mercy and in reparation for all that's happened? And we did for the rest of the year. I think it was 6 months left or something. And everyone but one, we had a bishop there. And it was a small showing, but it was people who were ardently praying, and if one or two were gathered in my name, right? So I do encourage people who are here or listening, and do things that seem small, like saying something to the guy on the Amtrak train, who's obviously Jewish, or doing a dedicated holy hour, start at this Lent, start at Holy Week, start whatever you decide to do. Prayer is action if we actually do believe our faith. And I would say we owe it to our Jewish elder brothers, fathers in the faith, to make moves like that.
Amen. Brief follow-up question, Kathryn. While we know that anti-Semitism has been an issue well before the Zionist movement and the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, it's hard to untangle this issue from the current political complexities. So why should Catholics in particular fight the temptation to remain apathetic? And I think you've answered that a little bit, but if you had any additional comments.
I often think of Cardinal O'Connor, who was a bishop in New York. And he founded this religious order, the Sisters of Life, who take the normal nun vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, and then they add one for the protection of human life. And this is just a little reflection, and you'll see why I'm reading it, that they wrote about Cardinal O'Connor. Cardinal O'Connor was passionate about God's redemptive work in souls. The Cardinal would implore us to labor along with Christ, to pick up the pieces of broken lives, lest any be lost. As a young priest, his greatest desire was to open a home for children with special needs. He had profound connection and love for them. He wasn't able to fulfill that dream because he was asked to become a Navy chaplain and spent 27 years in the Navy, achieving the rank of admiral. He would often reflect on a singular experience he had in 1975 before becoming the chief of Navy chaplains. In order to prepare for this tremendous task, he decided to visit the Nazi concentration camp in Dachau, Germany, to what was the site of some of the most infamous crimes against the dignity of the human person. He walked through the concentration camp and came to the crematoria where the bodies were burned. And in this, of all places, he had a mystical experience. He said, "I placed my hand in the oven and felt the intermingled ashes of Jew and Christian, rabbi, priest, and minister. The power of God was present as light in the midst of darkness, and Cardinal O'Connor was struck to the heart. He cried out, "Good God, how could human beings do this to other human beings?" He vowed in that moment that he would do whatever he could until his dying breath to promote the sacredness of every human life. He said, "My life was changed radically, not modestly, not fractionally, but radically, when I put my hand in the oven at Dachau." I knew that with all my studies and all my degrees, up until that moment, I knew no real theology. I learned it at Dachau. The men and women who died at Dachau shaped my adult life. For Jesus, as it was for Cardinal O'Connor, it was always about the individual person, the dazzling value, the infinite worth of a single soul made in the image and likeness of Almighty God. To him, it was not that 6 million Jews and 5 million Christians were killed in the Holocaust, but that one person of infinite worth was killed 11 million times, and that Christ experienced each death as his own. But he wouldn't let it end there. As the Archbishop of New York, he was called upon by John Paul II to assist in international diplomacy and was accredited with helping to establish diplomatic ties between the Vatican and the State of Israel. His funeral was a tremendous outpouring of appreciation, love, and respect rarely seen in the history of the American Catholic Church. Something to reflect on. He had become an influential leader not only among Catholics, but also within the Jewish community. A day before his funeral mass on May 7th, 2000, in an extraordinary tribute, dozens of New York rabbis and Jews gathered in St. Patrick's Cathedral to pay tribute to the man who, in the great cause of human life, had become, as one rabbi said, not only your good shepherd, he was our good shepherd too.
Wow. Thank you, Kathryn. Okay, I'd like to turn it to the gentlemen of the panel. James, you are in a unique and challenging space, and you started this work young. Well, you're still young, but you started this work even younger. And you're Gen Z, male, you're in that demographic that Trent was talking about earlier. And that demographic is becoming more religious. And the trends are actually showing that men are surpassing women in religiosity, which I'm not sad about. With that shift comes the temptation to fall into anti-Semitic or anti-Judaic attitudes for the reasons we actually talked about earlier. And you personally felt the hate. How has that shaped your experience?
Well, start off saying that more religiosity is good. Can you hear me okay? I guess it's more, I attended this panel with Ross Douthat recently at Seaway, and they were talking about this idea of whether or not this return to religion is a good thing. And it, of course it is, but with the religious impulse, there's also danger with it being hijacked to something Trent was talking about, that religious fundamentalism, where I think a lot of guys who are Gen Z, my age as well, are coming from a very chaotic world and they want things very simplified. And so I think once they come into this space, they are in a certain situation where I think they're very drawn to a certain narrative. In my case, I can't really say I've felt the hate. It's been indirect, if anything. And it's not in the same way, we speak about as Christians will be persecuted for our faith, and that does happen. But having gotten to know Phil, working with the Philos project and being in the space and having friendships with the Jewish people, Aristotle speaks of a friend being another self. And it's through that I've felt the hate, whether or not it was directed towards me. There is definitely this spiritual aspect to it that I felt that I don't think I've ever felt with other cases, even going, to the March for Life growing up. It's very charged, but you don't feel it in this the same insidious way when you're, standing up for the Jewish people or anything like that. And I also come from a space too, where as a traditional Catholic, it wasn't because of anti-Semitism that I got involved in this space. It was for a positive reason. It was Philos-Semitism. It was studying history and theology. I had a senior class on the Holocaust, on totalitarianism. So it wasn't like I saw anti-Semitism within the church and was like, oh my gosh, I need to go solve all the problems that this entails. But it was being drawn through a positive good, through the Jewish roots of our faith, through theology class, reading an exegesis on Romans 9-11, and that paradigm shift of this idea of being grafted into the promises from the Old Testament and the Jewish people. And I started to gain this theoretical desire to come to engage in that more and engage with the Hebraic and Jewish roots of our faith. But it felt fake unless it was also a connection to the living people that tradition came from. So that's what led me to Philos. But I wouldn't say, in the cases of, I went to Christendom, studied there. There's a lot of potential there where people are very much raised on Vatican II and a lot of good that came from it as well. But I think with this new influx of converts who are coming from that chaotic world, they're also bringing with them, kind of the meme, social media culture as well. And it's almost like, early church where all of a sudden when the church opened up to Gentiles, you had this huge intake, but also with that came a bunch of different sort of baggage, I think, as well. It would have been, earlier pagan anti-Semitism. So you almost get, I guess, a potential for, with this rise of converts, which is a good thing, also the dangers that they might be carrying certain presuppositions and social media baggage or Gen Z baggage as well, which could turn dangerously. But yeah, it is very acutely felt in a way that I've never felt with my own faith in terms of being hated for just being Catholic. In Phil's case too, even if I'm just around him in certain situations, you can kind of feel there's this very acute apparent hatred. And it goes to, I think, a lot of the same hatred of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The fact that we are so united that you have, at the same time, there's rising anti-Semitism, of course, attacks on Christians elsewhere. But I think something people don't realize is that while Christians are the most persecuted worldwide in terms of numbers, ratio-wise, if you're Jewish, you're much more likely to be persecuted than if you are a Christian. And the places that Christians are being persecuted is because of radical Islam or things like that. So you have to be in a very specific situation. But I think just any Jew across the board is likely felt that hate. But yeah, again, for me, it's come from that positive aspect of growing in friendship through a love of the Hebraic roots for our faith that I've come to, feel the pain of a friend as well.
Thank you, James. Yeah, we're very careful at Philos Catholic not to use the word traditional because there's nothing more traditional than being Hebraic and being tapped into your Jewish roots. So, that phrase Catholic fundamentalist, I think, is a better way to be talking about it. Thank you, James. You kind of reminded me that wonderful article by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on creative minorities, where he says when Jews and Catholics or Jews and Christians are finally kind of united and work toward the true, the good, and the beautiful, then Christian persecution is something we can more seriously tackle. Really, really moved by that. If you haven't read that article, it's on First Things, worth the read. Phil. Okay, in our Beyond Rome podcast with you and James, a Gen Z Jew and Catholic walk into a bar. It happens frequently with these two. Both young Gen Z men. You're both devoted to your respective Catholic and Jewish traditions. And someone commented, if me and James were really your friends, Phil, you would have converted by now. All right. How would you respond to that perspective? And more broadly, why do you think misunderstandings and divisions between our faiths have persisted for centuries?
Sure. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. My whole life, I like to say that I've been an Orthodox Jew amidst a sea of intellectual Catholics. And so I think I texted one friend of mine that I was speaking at CIC, and he said, "It's about time you've come home." So it's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, so that episode that we recorded was just trying to give a taste of something that James and I actually do, which is to have a drink and talk about all the good things. And this comment that this obviously anonymous troll made on the post, it really did strike me. It was very hurtful for a few reasons. First, shortly after that podcast, Simone and I had the privilege to speak to Professor Hildebrand from Franciscan. And I had mentioned that we received this comment, and he was very disturbed by it and said something that I think was so moving. He said that that's just simply not how God's grace works. God's grace doesn't work in such a way that if they were just better Christians, then they'd have converted an Orthodox Jew. But I also think that looking at a very objective level, it is an awful way to view friendship. I think most good friendships are built off of curiosity, of mutual respect, of wanting to learn from one another. And I have spent my entire time here at the Philos Project learning from James, Simone, and from the entire team. And a recent example, I'm reading, as part of a reading group, James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And I am an Orthodox Jew reading a book about early 20th century Catholicism, frankly. And there were many passages that I simply was just unaware of. Was Joyce describing a caricature of something? Was this an accurate representation of things? And what do you know? I have two people who I know that I can reach out to and have our friendship blossom, doing something that we both love, talking about literature, talking about theology. And I also think that just building these friendships is so key to the future of Jewish-Christian relations. A few weeks ago, I was in Dallas with the Philos Project at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. So it's not a Catholic crowd, it's an evangelical crowd. And I was one of probably 7 or 8 other Jews who were there amidst a sea of thousands of people. And what struck me was I was the first Orthodox Jew that many people have ever met. And once they realized that I wasn't a Jew who had converted to Jesus and was a practicing Orthodox Jew, they were amazed. Frankly, I was amazed too. I was amazed that so few people, with churches with thousands of members, had never met an Orthodox Jew. And I think, facilitating those friendships goes such a long way. And so about, saying something to the man on the Amtrak train, one thing that I want to highlight is, so on October 7th, I was, of course, in synagogue. It was a Jewish holiday. And things started trickling into synagogue. And as someone who defended his master's thesis on Israeli counterterrorism strategy, I was unsure about what to believe, if how accurate this is. And of course, I can't turn on my phone. There's one more day left of the holiday. It was a very painful, of course, holiday. And by the time I turned on my phone and I had seen everything that had occurred, and after I finished crying, I noticed I was so distracted by reading the news, my phone kept ringing. And I kept rejecting whoever it was that was calling me. And lo and behold, when I finally listened to the voicemail afterwards, it was a Catholic professor at a university that I've never attended. We've just had a correspondence talking about literature and poetry for the past few years, who kept calling to say, I'm here for you. I just want you to know. I'm here for you. And I was inundated, frankly, in the aftermath of October 7th with those emails. And there are people, I won't mention their names to protect their privacy, who have a lot better things to do than talk to me, who were constantly checking up on me, asking how I was, asking about my friends and family in Israel. And if that isn't friendship, I don't know what else is. And I think it's that type of friendship, not the friendship of if Simone and James were better Catholics that have converted me. It's that type of friendship that we have to work on facilitating, because I truly believe that that's a direct line to some redemption, frankly, in this entire space.
Thank you so much. So beautiful, Phil. It's really fun at work because Phil our conversations are fun. Guess what, Simone? Jews and Catholics have been talking past each other for centuries. I love Jewish Shabbat because you can't do anything but read books, So anyways, it's very fun. It's such a pleasure to work with you, Phil. The morale boost we need. A follow-up question to Phil, James, and the entire panel. In the unique space of of being a Jew among Catholics, among Christians, actually, because we're ecumenical at the Philos Project. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you encounter? And what have been some of the most fun, or thought-provoking theological conversations you've had with us or would like to have? Because in our conversations, again, it's really fun at work. He'll be like, is confession really like what I've read in this James? And I'm like, kind of, so Phil keeps saying, fascinating, just fascinating, So, again, that's like my dream for the church, for the world, is that we get to the fun stuff, not always damage control or reparation, but like actual building, So, yeah, if you wanted to begin by answering that.
Sure. I think what I've encountered most is, I think sometimes I've been amazed at what Jews and Christians think about the other, and I think sometimes we expect that the other is briefed on the types of questions and curiosities that we have about the other. And I think Jews and Christians, we do history very different. We have an approach to history that's very different, and our mindset, our daily lives are organized in different ways. And I think coming to terms with that and meeting each other where the other is very important. And so I think that's probably what I've encountered the most. But I do keep using the word fascinating at work. I think I tried looking at it in our chats, and it nearly blew up my phone, frankly, the amount of times I've used it, because I think there is a lot of both of our traditions that we ought to share with one another, that we ought to show each other the beauty of our faiths. And even though there are a lot of misconceptions about certain things within the faith. So one misconception that my coworkers are probably tired of me speaking about is every once in a while the Talmud will come into some anti-Semitic Twitter discourse and people will start raging about the Talmud and taking lines out of context. Of course, the Talmud has to be approached, with a certain mindset that, of course, Orthodox Jews like me who have spent their life studying the Talmud have an understanding of. There's also a lot of pain, of course, in the Talmud with the disputations that occurred during the High Middle Ages. But I think it's being curious about those things. It's meeting each other there that I think is the way to overcome some of those misconceptions. Please.
Yeah, because Phil, I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but you and I are kind of leading parallel lives because I'm one of the only Catholics at Tablet. So we sort of have a reverse situation there. And I have had the same experience, I guess, in reverse. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that was one of the things that made me so badly want to get my kids and anyone from my parish who was interested to attend a Shabbat service. Because I was like, there's just so much there. Like, there's just so much there. And my kids, who I can't get to sit still through a mass, will sit through a Shabbat service, and they participate fully. Oh my gosh. My son is like, I need a book to touch to this. Where's my sitter? I want to touch it to the scroll when it comes by. And it was great because it was a family Shabbat service. So the rabbi would take time to kind of explain. It was a Reform congregation, and she would take time to explain what was going on. And these little Catholic school kids, she's like, okay, so we're going to say the Shema. This is the Shema prayer. You cover your eyes. Look, all these little Catholic school kids are covering their face to recite the Shema. And it's so powerful. And it wasn't that dissimilar from a mass in many ways. Structurally, it was very familiar to them. And I just thought, what a gift. And, I imbibe so much. And I also have those texts with colleagues sometimes. Is this true? Have you really, and it's so enriching. And one thing that I've tried really hard, because I was trying to get my kids' school on board for stuff like that. And they were like, well, we do a Yom HaShoah thing. And I'm like, no, don't treat Jews like field trips, okay? Like, the Jews are not a field trip for you. They're not, don't set up a barn at Christmas and be like, oh, what if Jerusalem was a real place? No, go have a Holy Land experience in someone's gym. Like, no, go to your local synagogue. There are real Jews. I'm Yisrael High. There are real Jews who are alive today that you can meet. And it's very illuminating for both parties. And so, yeah, I think it's really enriching. And, don't cheat yourself out of a really fun, cool experience, basically.
Yeah. Can I say something quick? I went on one of the Philos trips to the Holy Land. It was my second time there, and both the first and second time I did this. But I was tired when I got there, as you tend to be, and my plan had been to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre the first morning, but I was tired and I went to sleep, and then I heard the Muslim call to prayer. I'm like, The Muslims can pray, I can pray. And so I relived the experience I had the first time that I was there. It was, I go off to the old city, and who's there? There are Muslims who are going to pray, Jews who are going to pray, and Christians who are going to pray. And I've said, and I don't think it's an exaggeration, it's like one of the safest experiences I ever had in an odd way, being in the old city at 4:30 in the morning or whatever it is, and everybody's going to pray. And it's really beautiful, and you realize, okay, there is meeting ground here,
Amazing. In fairness, though, that was a very exhausting trip.
Well, we hadn't started that morning. I was already exhausted, apparently.
Okay, some questions from the attendees. What is the dominant Jewish attitude towards Christians at this time? Is there any reverse bias? How does this affect the conversation?
Sure, thank you. I'm always afraid when I'm asked these types of questions because I'm a little Jewish kid from Philadelphia, and I have no ability to speak on behalf of the entire Jewish population. Things would be different if I did, but alas, I don't. I think an important point to mention. So very often when you see these anti-Semitic things from the Talmud pop up, every once in a while, someone will take some line from the Talmud about Jesus and about Christians. Oftentimes out of context, oftentimes, frankly, I've seen very fake quotes that don't actually exist have popped up about the Christians in the Talmud. And some of them could be harsh, but I think it's important to know first the historical context of some of these lines, especially when the Babylonian Talmud was written, and in Babylonia that the Jews are a persecuted minority, and so you have to understand that as a polemic, I think. But more to the point is that they don't actually reflect the attitudes that modern Jews have towards Christians. When I joined the Philos project, I had maybe part of me had expected some backlash from the Jewish community. Frankly, the opposite. I received nothing but love and encouragement. And so I think that we are very much appreciative of our Christian brothers and sisters who have stepped up to defend and support the Jewish people. And whatever attitudes you might find in the Talmud do not reflect, I think, the vast majority, if not all, of the Jews alive today.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, next question. Oh, this is a good one. And I also have two friends who are from the Muslim faith here with us, so this is appropriate. Do you see a role for the Muslim religious actors to address anti-Semitism other than condemning? How? And another question, please speak to the lack of bond between Jewish and Muslim faiths. I want to say quickly, I don't want to take it away from the panelists, but really quickly, I had the honor and privilege of moderating a panel at the International Religious Freedom Summit on the sexual violence perpetuated against women on 10/7. And two of the panelists, which are half the panelists, were women of a Muslim background. So, and one of them is here today, which I won't point her out, but she's here. You should talk to her. She's amazing. So that, to me, these are heroic women. It is not easy to do that. And so I just wanted to share that fact with you before I open it up to the panel to answer the question. That's her. Okay, thank you, Soraya. I didn't want you to be mad at me. There she is.
Okay, all right. Well, so as a religious literacy correspondent, I can speak to this in a couple ways. The first of which is the first thing I ever did about Catholicism and anti-Semitism. A friend from a Muslim background reached out to me and said, hey, this is great. What about Islamophobia? And I thought about that very deeply because she's a friend and her feelings matter to me. And also because I come from an ecumenical background as an Army brat and an Army wife. I was talking to someone back in the green room about how one thing the Army does very, very well, I'm going to stick to Army because I'm an Army wife, but this is true across the military, is ecumenism. We take other people's beliefs seriously and we respect them. And because at the end of the day, we're all in pursuit of the common good. And so that's one way that we're able to help each other during COVID. Everybody helped the other religious community get what they needed so they could meet in person under the social distancing guidelines. It was very cool to see. So a few years ago, Tablet had an initiative called The Tent. And it was because Ramadan, Passover, Easter, and the Hindu holiday of Holi all overlap that year. And so we said, what if we could get religious leaders from all of these faiths together to talk about things they had in common, how to pray, how to fight, how to love. And there was a fourth pillar that I always forget, but I'm sure it was also beautiful. And I said, we've got to get military chaplains, because this is what they do. They talk about these things to ecumenical audiences, to young men in particular who are searching, because that was kind of what we were trying to do with the tent is, look, we know there's this thirst out there for religion. It can be intimidating to walk up to a house of worship and say, hey, I'm new. What do you got? So we were going to come to them. And so we got 2 Muslim army chaplains to come on board. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. And and it was just, what do we have in common? What are our religious traditions? What do we value above all? And one thing that I would say really stuck out to me recently, because I write about everything that's not Judaism, basically, for Tablet, I had an article last Friday about Ramadan and addicts. How do you handle a month of self-denial when you're an addict? And I talked to some folks from Miladi Islami, which is the Muslim 12-step program modeled on AA. And one of the women said, look, you're supposed to take it one day at a time. 24 hours is a long time. Having the day broken up into 5 prescribed prayer times gives you a new opportunity to restart every few hours throughout the day. If you've messed up, you know there's a new start coming the next time you can pray. And I thought, well, gosh, Judaism has that. Catholicism has that in the Office of Readings and the Liturgy of the Hours. We have these opportunities to sanctify our day, and to have that insight come to me from a woman from another faith, from the Muslim faith, writing for a Jewish magazine, was profoundly meaningful to me. And so I think, there are opportunities to get together. And I would say, again, this goes back to a leadership thing. I don't know, maybe there are priests that do a lot of great ecumenical work, but it seems like a lot of times when you see like ministers getting together from a town, it's usually all the Protestants. It would be nice to see more Catholic priests out there doing ecumenical stuff with other faith leaders on certain issues. So I think, again, this is a command emphasis issue that'd be really cool to see, where we could find places to get religious leaders to get together, get their congregations together to focus on some aspect of the common good.
I remember years ago, this flows exactly from this, the late Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, was speaking in New York, I think at the 92nd Street Y, and he said the most powerful ecumenical work is on the front lines helping people. So building a hospital, that kind of work, helping in an emergency situation. Muslims, Jews, Christians, you learn a lot about one another and what's really important to you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to transition. Don't go anywhere. Just stretch.
Simone,
yes.
Can I just say something super quick?
Yes.
It's a long story. I made a mistake and made 35 copies of this cartoon by Peter Brooks, which Eli Sharabi gave to the president the other day. And as you can see, it says never again with Holocaust survivors, and then again with 3 of the hostages who were released, one of them being Eli Sharabi. And anyhow, feel free to take one. It's obviously a conversation starter. It's obviously controversial, but it's a way to remember that there are things happening in this world that we have to know about and talk about and do something about in whatever ways we're called to. So please feel free. They're outside.